church went silent the moment Thomas Whitfield grabbed Pastor Ellis Cole's wrist and stopped it inches from his forehead. 200 people froze. Thomas didn't apologize. He just stared at the man who'd led this church for 11 years and said, "Not tonight, Pastor, not ever again." Then he walked out, leaving whispers behind him and a pastor whose smile cracked for just a second before he caught himself. Nobody understood what they'd just seen. This is the story of why it happened. 3 weeks earlier, Thomas Whitfield had everything: a construction company spanning 4 states, a wife who adored him, a daughter, Renee, who called every Sunday. He'd given more to Grace Fellowship than anyone in its history, and he trusted Pastor Cole completely the same way he trusted concrete and steel, solid, dependable, something you build a life on. So when Renee flew in for a visit and mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd noticed some of the wealthier families quietly leaving the church over the years, Thomas brushed it off. People move. People change churches. That's not a mystery, sweetheart. That's just life. He was proud of this church, proud of what he'd built into it, and pride made him slow to see what was right in front of him. Renee let it go, but she didn't forget it. Over the next 2 weeks, she started making calls, quiet ones, to people she used to see in the pews who'd simply stopped coming. Most wouldn't talk. One did. An older woman named Carol, who used to sit 3 rows behind the Whitfields, finally admitted, voice shaking, that after months of private counseling sessions with Pastor Cole, she'd signed over almost everything she and her late husband had saved to something called the Cole Restoration Trust. She said the pastor never forced her. He didn't have to. He'd spent months telling her that her wealth was a test from God, that holding on to it was a kind of spiritual sickness, that giving it away was the only way to prove her faith was real. By the time she doubted him, her family had already stopped speaking to her because Cole had convinced her that anyone questioning the gift was working against God's plan for her life. She moved out of state a year later, too embarrassed to face anyone from church again. Renee brought this to her father. He still didn't want to believe it. He argued with her, defended the pastor, reminded her how much Cole had done for this community. But that Sunday, without meaning to, he started watching Cole differently, watching how the pastor's hand lingered a little longer on the wealthy members during the blessing line, watching how those same members started disappearing from his personal calendar into private sessions in the pastor's office, sometimes for months at a time. Over the following weeks, Thomas quietly built what Renee had started. He didn't go to the police. He went to people. He tracked down 3 more former members, each with a version of the same story. Generous people, guided gently and patiently over months into believing that surrendering their savings was obedience, not exploitation. He pulled financial records where he could, cross-referenced donation dates against Cole's private counseling calendar, and slowly the pattern became undeniable. Not a curse, not magic, just a method practiced and refined on person after person. Then Thomas made a mistake his pride wouldn't let him avoid. He confronted Cole directly, alone, before he had everything locked down. Cole didn't panic. He smiled and said, calm as ever, "You've always been generous, Thomas. I only help generosity find its proper direction. Some people need guidance to let go of what's holding them back from God." It wasn't a confession. It was a man who genuinely believed his own justification, certain that stripping people of their wealth was righteous work, even while he lived comfortably off the trust it fed. Cole struck first. By that Sunday, word had spread through the board that Thomas had threatened the pastor, twisted just enough to make Thomas look unstable. Old friends stopped calling. Board members who'd known him for a decade avoided his eyes. Even his wife asked him quietly one night if he was certain, if maybe grief or stress was making him see conspiracies that weren't there. That was the lowest point, sitting alone in his study, reputation cracking, wondering if he'd destroyed his own name, chasing a truth he couldn't yet prove. That's what pushed him to finish it properly. He spent the next month doing it right, collecting signed statements from Carol and the others, financial documents, bank transfers, even old emails Cole had sent encouraging members to keep their giving private from family. When Thomas finally walked into service that Sunday and stopped Cole's hand before it reached his forehead, it wasn't panic. It was the last piece falling into place, a public line drawn before he handed everything to the district attorney's office the following morning. The investigation confirmed what Thomas had found and more, the same pattern repeated in 2 other churches Cole had led before this one. He resigned within the month, and 3 of his former members came forward publicly, no longer ashamed once they saw they weren't alone. Cole was eventually charged with financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, and the congregation that once revered him watched him walk out of that sanctuary for the last time, not in disgrace exactly, but in silence, the same silence that had filled the room the day Thomas stopped his hand. Thomas still attends Grace Fellowship every Sunday. He still gives generously, but he sits closer to the doors now, and when the new pastor offers a blessing, Thomas bows his head and keeps his hands folded in his lap, because he learned the hard way that the most dangerous kind of manipulation never announces itself. It just asks patiently again and again until you forget you were ever allowed to say no.